The hallway of Bethesda Naval Medical Center had never gone this quiet. A little girl in a lavender shirt pointed a trembling finger at the collarbone of a nurse she had never met before in her life, and in that single breathless moment, 3 admirals, 2 doctors, and a room full of nurses forgot how to breathe. Before we continue, if you believe in second chances, in the quiet miracles that happen in hospital hallways, in the idea that the people we love never truly leave us, hit that like button, drop a comment below, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Nurse Rachel Coleman had worked the pediatric burn and trauma unit at Bethesda for 11 years. She was known for her steady hands, her calm voice in chaos, and the thin, pale scar that ran along her collarbone, just above her scrubs, a scar she never talked about, not even to her closest co-workers. When people asked, she simply said, "Old accident," and changed the subject. Nobody pushed. In a hospital, everyone carries something they don't explain. That Tuesday morning, Rear Admiral Thomas Whitfield walked into the pediatric wing flanked by 2 junior officers, his dress uniform crisp, his face carved from decades of discipline and loss. His 7-year-old daughter, Hope, sat in a wheelchair beside him, recovering from a routine appendectomy that had turned complicated overnight. Thomas had built his life on control, 22 years as a Navy SEAL, 3 combat deployments, a chest full of ribbons that told half a story and hid the other half. The half he hid was the one that mattered most. His wife, Grace, a Navy nurse herself, had died 4 years earlier in a car accident on a rain-soaked Virginia highway, leaving him to raise Hope alone. Since then, Thomas had built walls so high that even his own daughter sometimes had to shout to be heard over them. Hope had been quiet since the surgery, drifting in and out of sedation, murmuring things the nurses assumed were dreams. But when Rachel walked into the room that morning to check vitals, something in Hope's face changed. She sat up, ignoring the ache in her side, and reached out toward Rachel's collar with the unfiltered certainty only a child possesses. "You have Daddy's scar," she said, her small voice cutting through the sterile air like a struck bell. "Mommy gave it to him. She told me the story. It's from the fire on the boat." Rachel froze. Her hand instinctively rose to her collarbone, to the scar she had carried since she was 26 years old, the scar from a training accident on a naval vessel off the coast of Norfolk, a fire in the engine room, thick black smoke, and a fellow sailor who had pulled her free through a hatch barely wide enough for one body, let alone 2. She remembered his voice through the smoke, steady and unshaken, telling her to breathe, to hold on, to trust him. She remembered his name tag, half melted, unreadable. She had spent years wondering if he survived, if he ever knew he saved her life, because in the chaos afterward, amid the fire crews and the medevac helicopters, he had vanished from her world as quickly as he'd entered it. Thomas stood in the doorway, his composed military bearing cracking for the first time in front of witnesses. "What did you say?" he asked his daughter, his voice barely above a whisper, though it carried through the entire room. Hope, oblivious to the storm she had summoned, simply repeated herself, patient the way only children can be with adults who aren't listening fast enough. "Mommy said Daddy has a scar on his shoulder from pulling a lady out of a fire on a ship. She said the lady was scared and Daddy told her to breathe. Mommy said it was the bravest thing Daddy ever did, braver than all his medals." She reached for Rachel's hand with the easy familiarity of a child who somehow already understood something the adults were still catching up to. "Your scar matches his. I saw it when he changed his shirt. It looks just like yours." The silence that followed was the kind that presses against your eardrums, the kind hospital staff rarely experience because there is almost always a monitor beeping, a page overhead, footsteps in the hall. But for nearly 10 full seconds, nobody in that room moved. Rachel's mind raced backward through 11 years, through a memory she had folded up and tucked away because looking at it too long hurt too much, the memory of a young sailor's arms lifting her through smoke, of promising herself she would find him one day and thank him properly, and never getting the chance because the Navy moved people the way rivers move stones, constantly, without asking permission. Thomas took a slow step into the room, studying Rachel's face the way he might study terrain before a mission, searching for a landmark he recognized. "Norfolk," he said quietly. "March, 13 years ago. USS Cole training exercise. Engine room fire." It wasn't a question anymore. It was a man assembling the pieces of a memory he had also carried quietly for over a decade, one he had told his late wife about during their courtship, one he had never spoken of again because talking about it meant talking about how close he had come to not making it out himself. Rachel's eyes filled before she could stop them. "That was me," she said, her voice cracking on the second word. "I never got your name. I looked for you for 2 years and then I stopped, because I thought maybe it was better that way. I thought maybe you didn't want to be found." Thomas shook his head slowly, and for the first time since he had walked through those doors, the SEAL Admiral who had faced enemy fire without flinching looked like he might come undone in front of his daughter's hospital bed. "I looked for you too," he admitted. "For a while. Then Grace and I got married, and I told myself the story was over. I told her about it once. I guess she never forgot it. I guess she told Hope more than I realized." The junior officers exchanged glances, unsure whether they were witnessing a reunion or something closer to a resurrection. Down the hallway, other nurses began to gather in the doorway, drawn by the stillness rather than any noise, sensing the way people always sense that something rare is happening. Hope, still holding Rachel's hand, tilted her head with the simple wisdom children sometimes stumble into. "Mommy said everybody who saves somebody gets tied to them forever," she said. "Like a string you can't see. She said maybe you'd find each other again someday. I think this is someday." Nobody in the room had a response for that. Rachel knelt beside the wheelchair, tears slipping freely now, and gently pressed her hand over Hope's small one. "Your mommy sounds like she was a very wise woman," she managed to say. "She was a nurse too," Hope said proudly. "Just like you." Thomas exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for long years, ever since the accident that took Grace from him, ever since he had convinced himself that grief was something to be managed alone, in silence, the way he managed everything else. Something in this moment, his daughter's unfiltered honesty, the impossible coincidence of a scar recognized in a hospital hallway, the sudden reappearance of a woman he had once pulled from fire and never forgotten, cracked something open in him that for years of therapy and discipline had failed to touch. Over the following weeks, as Hope continued her recovery, Rachel found herself assigned more and more often to her care, not entirely by accident. Thomas began staying longer during visiting hours, no longer rushing back to his office the moment rounds concluded. Conversations that started about medication schedules slowly became conversations about Grace, about grief, about a fire on a ship that had somehow tethered two strangers together across 13 years without either of them realizing it. Hope, for her part, seemed to consider the whole matter settled, the way children settle things, simply and completely, without complication. She had said what she saw. The adults could figure out the rest. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that the people who cross our path sometimes come back into our lives exactly when we need them most, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who could use a little hope today. Your support means more than you know, and it helps this channel keep telling stories like this one. Before we close, I want to ask you something important. If you've ever experienced a moment where the past unexpectedly found its way back to you, in a way that felt impossible to be coincidence, please share it in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories often become the seeds for the next one I tell. Rachel Coleman never expected to find the answer to a question she'd stopped asking years ago, standing in a pediatric ward on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Thomas Whitfield never expected his daughter's innocent observation to reopen a door he had sealed shut out of grief and duty. And Hope, too young to understand the weight of what she had done, simply believed what her mother had told her, that some threads, once tied, are never truly cut, no matter how much time or distance tries to pull them apart. In the end, it wasn't fate or coincidence that brought them together in that hospital room. It was a scar, a memory, and the honest, unshakable voice of a child who saw something true before anyone else was brave enough to say it out loud.